Welcome to the Poetry Show with the Podcast Poets. We aim to bring poems and poetic discussion to people who love poetry, for those of you who just aren't all that sure, and to poetry novices. Maybe we can inspire you to try a poem for yourself. I need to warn you that we might just use a couple of edgy words, PG-13 if you will, but I can assure you that we will touch on an edgy idea or two. In each show we focus on a theme, and how 4, occasionally 5, very different poets have approached that idea in their poems. Hopefully something for everyone. So, gathered with me here, Alan, to discuss grandparents is
Rose, Becca,
and Kit.
Today we're discussing grandparents. It's not atypical to remember grandparents affectionately, the indulgent foil to strict or perceived strict parents. This is not always true. The tyrannical parent can often become a fiercer grandparent in turn. All this grand and great stuff, though, is quite confusing. Grand being a term of respect, whereas great just means big. Do we have grand aunts or great uncles? Which term came first? And why on earth, actually great can mean earth too, why on earth did we not stick with the old English description of elder parent, third parent and fourth parent? And thinking north or Norse, I'm often remind my dear wife, here up north, they're fathers and moders, not posh southern fathers and mothers. So I'm going to begin with a short poem that covers this little issue about grand and great. It's called Grate, and I should say this particular case it's spelt Grate. I had great grandparents, though being northern, grandparents, acquiescing to a young boy's peccadilloes, waiting for the new tram, the long way round the grass, and the endless rounds of rummy. My great-grandparents I only associate with the bungalow and old-fashioned wheelbarrow, not fully appreciating the 6-year-old barely constrained by indulgent grandmother stomping around the vegetable patch. I'm not sure if I had grandparents, more great parents whose modus operandi was to discourage and destroy. There were, though, grand times where great things were done, despite the great effect on me.
That's true. You were a child of empire, if I recall.
Yes, well, I mean,
they went over to various places like Iran, Iraq, and India and dug things up and built things. And
yes. But that doesn't change the parenting.
No. I like that. Well, how does great, because I'm stupid, how does great also mean earth?
Well, great.
That's not Kit nod her head and I'm sitting going, I'm the dumb one. Strangely,
grand and great all have the same etymological roots.
Okay.
Although some of them are more Norse and some of them come through the Germanic. Okay. And great, Grate, comes through the Germanic line. And it includes the idea of grating and scraping and destroying. A great builder is someone who destroys something, for example. In that sense, you're grating things away, and so that's why. And great just happens to also have another route that leads to earth.
Well, I like the bit about father, mither, and whatever.
Father and mother. Father and mother.
Okay, because I go to Oslo and I'm dealing with this woman named Jorunn Torestad, and I love her. And she was trying to trace her great-great-great-grandfather to the workhouse, and it's called Teep Oldfar, because Oldfar is grandfather. Yes, and I'm sitting going, I love it. It's a very visual language. So that was my input to that, ignorance and comment about Oslo.
Yes, when I was researching, I looked up, I tried to find out what the Old English for grandparents was, because having seen that the term grandparents didn't really turn up until 12th, 13th, 14th century. And in fact, they may have been great parents before they were grandparents.
Well, Old English it's got Norse.
It is Norse,
yes, basically.
So then it came up as sort of elder parents, and then fourth parent and fifth parent. I thought that was great. You just put the number in. It's just so much easier.
It's a lot simpler. Yeah.
It does kind of harken back to sort of a society where sort of the older generation was as much involved in the raising of the children as the parent generation.
Well, yes.
So the idea of it's not just like it's just not just my mum's mum; it's another parent.
Yes.
Actually, I don't know. I don't know if that's sort of a kind of apocryphal sort of notion of how family used to work. Because I don't actually know if the research bears that out.
I think it does, because if you'll notice, a lot of the older houses were very large and were large enough to carry and hold more than one unit family.
Well, like the Waltons. Good night, Grandpa. People were there because then you had built-in caretakers. You had people to watch, and that has been lost with people with the nuclear family or whatever, or the parent with the small creature off in the middle of nowhere by themselves and dependent upon childcare. There's not a series of aunts and uncles and grands wandering around. Says, can you watch her or him? I got to run out to that's lost, which is a shame.
It's very much this post-war idea of the mobile family, get on your bike to go to work, because that action in itself is destroying the family, and that's costing the government more because they're having to provide help and money for those families that can't keep it together. When if families were actually grouping together and living together, A, there'd be less abuse, B, there would be less
actually
there would be less stress and strain, and C, they'd actually have to fork out less money to support people who were struggling.
That was coming up in my early anthropology lectures, that a lot of child abuse tends to have come along with the lack of grandparents and older relatives in the house. No one to take the edge off of a harassed parent, no witnesses, but also just really no one to watch. No.
I mean, I'm sure there's been cases of sort of grandparents who are involved but still kind of stand by for whatever reason. But that does make kind of sense.
Yeah.
I think as well now it's an idea that we associate with working class and poorer families to have a large family and to have everyone at home. But actually, I think that's more because it's a luxury to be able to afford multiple properties for various members of your family. And I think that's blinding us potentially to the huge benefits in keeping a family together.
Well, yes. I mean, that's why during agriculture, people started having more children, because who's going to work the farm for free? You. I made you. Get out there. and you do need built-in helpers. And the best tie is not money or obligation, but it's obligation based on love and a mutual concern. Yeah. Now, do you have grandparents? Are they?
I do. I have 2 surviving grandparents and 2 that are no longer with us. Family is actually pertinent in this situation. I have a very large family on both sides of my parents' families, and I'm very close with all of my grandparents, thankfully.
Oh, nice.
And we regularly have huge family gatherings on my father's side of, 25, 30 people.
Wow.
All of my cousins and first cousins once removed and second cousins, and both of my grandparents who are, they split up and now they're friends again, which is lovely. So all of my family comes together. And I'm very lucky in that actually we have a family where nobody significantly has fallen out or no one's estranged.
No? Do you do Thanksgiving or Christmases or anything like that? Everyone's cheerful?
We do birthdays more than anything else because, as I say, there are a lot of us. We do try and get together for a post-Christmas meal and book out an entire pub somewhere in the middle of nowhere.
Can you imagine a whole room of people that like each other?
Well, when my grandmother was 90-something,
it's an open mic when I do it.
We had a big family gathering in Sheffield, and I think there was something like 200 people there.
Wow.
But that was. But you see, my grandmother had sort of 6 or 7 siblings, so the range of aunts and uncles and grandaunts and uncles and nieces and so on was legion. They're all over the place. I mean, I get the impression if I go to Sheffield, everybody I talk to is going to be a relative or something.
I spent a wonderful afternoon on the beach actually with the entirety of my dad's side of the family, and we'd just taken over this entire place. And I was out climbing on the rocks and I looked around, and everybody I could see was related to me, and that was wonderful.
That is nice.
Yeah.
The house I had in Connecticut, I'm trying to remember. I think the little tiny house next door was where the mother and father came from with 6 kids, and the house I was in was from the son who married someone and built the house with help of relatives badly. I won't go there. And the house across the street had been someone else, and the bigger house up the hill was one of their sons. And at one point, almost the whole neighborhood was related. And that's when you keep an eye out, isn't it, for other family members?
Yeah, I mean, there is this whole issue about neighbourhood and family, and I think government are ignoring this at their peril. You know, the Conservatives started talking about big society, but all they meant was cheap and nasty.
Yes, well.
But I used to remember when I first got a car and I would drive up into London from the Croydon area, there was nobody on the streets, literally nobody. But there were a lot of people in the bus queues waiting for buses. 10 years later, you couldn't move for traffic. And I finally figured it out, that what it was is that very typically children will settle not next door to their parents, that's a little bit too close these days, but just far enough away that their parents don't interfere and mum doesn't turn up every other morning, but still close enough to go and take the kids back to visit mum. And so when it was a walking distance away, it literally, you might at the most be half a mile, quarter of a mile, that was the limit. Then you got the bus, so people might go 4 or 5 miles away. Then, of course, we had the car. And, of course, a half hour's journey by car could be 30 miles in any direction. Then you have this other issue that sibling number 1 lives 30 miles to the east and sibling number 2 lives 30 miles to the west. And then that suddenly creates a new problem, like after school. Schools finish at early because they assume kids are going to go home to some sort of parenting.
Yeah, that's bizarre.
Which is very bizarre.
They've held on to that. Schools end at 2 and 3 in the afternoon and no one's home.
But the thing is that when there were aunts and uncles around, that's where the kids would go. You know, mum's not home. Oh, I'll go and see Auntie Sue.
Did you have grandparents, Becca? Did you?
Right. I kind of have in some ways an abundance of grandparents and in some ways a lack, because on my mum's side, I've got no biological grandparents that are still living as of last year. My dad's mum was the last one; she died. And on my mum's side, I had my grandma who died in sort of rather traumatic circumstances when my mum was very young, and surviving grandfather. And my first poem's actually about him. And he was a film actor, and you can Google him and you'll find him in James Bond and The King and I and stuff like that. He was called Martin Benson. Name dropping.
Writing this name down. Yes.
And he was always sort of typecast as villains because he was sort of vaguely swarthy looking kind of guy with a lot of sort of presence, and I was terrified of him for various reasons. And this is the poem that I wrote shortly after he died, after sort of seeing him in hospital just before he died. It was the first time I'd ever seen him with his teeth out.
Wow.
Staring out from the TV screen beneath a monster's brow, you were always cast a villain, features twisted, partially hidden, writing poetry. The big bad wolf with bright white teeth, all the better to bite me with, but they were false. Toothless, declawed, the man in the bed looked nothing like the beast from a memory of a cautionary tale.
Ooh. So was he actually brusque, or was it just perception, do you think?
He was mostly just one of those people who was utterly in control of every room he walked into. Even when he was, when he was walking very slowly and with his Zimmer frame, he'd walk into the room and said, yes, I'd like to sit there, and I'll be showing the children these photographs and stuff like that. And I was partially terrified of him because of that, and I was partially terrified of him because of sort of how my mum had sort of portrayed him to me. But that was sort of the first time I ever realised he was a human, and it wasn't long before he died.
How old were you?
Oh, gosh. I must have been, I don't know, 14, 15 probably?
Yeah, that's enough to make an impression then.
You've got an impression, and you've heard all the family stories by then about grandparents and other relatives.
Well, that is the thing. It's family stories, or it's the infection of rumor. Yeah.
It's funny that often we only learn things about our grandparents after they've died. I remember I learned details about my maternal grandmother's life that I hadn't known, because the celebrant was telling me about her life at her funeral.
Isn't that awful? But, now we live so openly on Facebook and Twitter, and almost too openly. A CIA agent was once on a talk show and said, "Why are you putting everything on Facebook? I used to have to go through garbage cans for weeks to find out your birth date, and I just But you find this stuff out because it was hidden.
Yeah.
at my dad's funeral, I'm finding the string of stuff out. I'm like, really? This is cool stuff, but it was bad or something. Well, it was a little.
Yeah, it wasn't until my dad's dad died, and I was at his funeral that I found out that he was a bit of a prankster, really. Like he used to teach a class, and one time he went in on the first day of the class. He went in as a janitor and said, "Right, so Mr. Miles isn't here, so I'm going to be teaching you engineering."
Go on, kid, top that.
Well, I think I might be the only person who's brought a poem from the perspective of a grandparent. Rose, I don't know if you brought one.
No, I didn't. I have one from an adopted grandmother.
I see. I am, of course, not a grandparent, being only 22, but because I don't have grandparental experience myself, I thought I would write one by Gaia.
Oh, yes.
The smell of a wet city is damp coal dust and dripping metal and exhaust pressed close to the ground by moisture that hangs in the air and hisses under car tires, and birds roost in alcoves where the drains run like rivers. Zeus is enthroned in his skyscraper Olympus penthouse office, dry and comfortable, conditioned 20 degrees warm. He does not think of the rain. His thoughts whir with development, forever questing forwards. He dreams in blueprints and pipelines and layering metal and brick over my earth. Below him are the titans in his basement underworld, cooking in his kitchens, cleaning in his halls, serving his drinks. Tethys, bound by an ancient defeat, smiles at his visitors behind her desk, between the two vases of perfect plastic flowers. He believes he can carpet me over, in the same way he beat down his aunts and uncles, my children, but I seethe under his foundations. I shall not quake and crack and send him tumbling down into the abyss of his father, who I helped him slay. But I send 3 pigeons to roost outside his window, to shelter from the rain and coo distractingly, reminding him of me. I am patient. Grandson he may be, bold, ungrateful, forgetful that I raised him, saved him from his father who would have swallowed him whole, that I gave him the power to raise an army, that my children fought at his side only to be imprisoned, deported and degraded for his glamour's sake. I forsake him. He believes he is immortal, but I know all things return to the earth.
Yes. Ooh, that goes back in with what Alan was saying about the traffic.
And about how great can mean earth. I was very pleased to hear you say that. I thought that's perfect.
Yeah, no.
I
keep waiting for Gaia to shake us off.
And also, you can't live your children's and children's lives, can you?
No.
A number of grandparents try to do that, and they
well, the parents
really
do it too. Yeah, they all do.
Yes.
And they must be allowed to make their own mistakes, even if you sit there in your all-knowing ancient wisdom thinking, this isn't going to last.
No, but you have to. You have to. I've let Emily do that. You have to.
You're there to catch them when they fall.
Yes, actually.
That's what it's really about. I was just looking down. I mean, I could theoretically be a great grandparent. No, I'm not. In spite of your remarks, my dear Rose, I'm pretty sure that there aren't any.
Turns out I probably have hundreds of brothers and sisters. That came out of my dad's funeral, too. His nickname was Red because he had reddish blonde hair. He died at 93 with his hair still blonde. It got a little white at the temples. And they're like, do you know what? He used to he would bring them to mom and say, sort this woman out. And he just wanted to have a string of abortions. This is back in the 40s.
Oh, my God.
I know, right? I bet you some of them were like, not gonna. And so my sister and I were like, how many do you think are out there? I don't know. So there could be just bunches going, I don't think I'm going to do that. And they just toddled off. You just have no idea. And yes, exactly. So I'm saying, yes, you're doing the math, right? But you could be. Plus people got started earlier, I think.
Yes.
When life could be shorter.
This deferring of birth, I mean, it's an issue we could talk about if we talk about other aspects of sexuality. But the fact that people are castigated about their sex lives when, we expect them to wait until long after in the old life they would be dead before they even have children, I find quite shocking and horrifying.
Yeah, maybe. No, I love that. Yeah. I've got a climate change poem about Mother Nature. I don't know. I think I will jump in and do mine then.
This is
I thought, well, I have grandparents. Well, Christine has made an appearance in a poem I called Charity, about when I'm thinking about the charity shop and I think about this cloth I saw as drapery, and it made me think of these chairs. And Christine said, I remember making drapes out of that cloth, and she was the grandma. So I thought, but I've done that one. So I wrote this one when she moved out in 1999, and I updated it after. So it's a very old poem, and I'm not sure how effective because people's voice changes. But this is and it's got all that inside information that they normally would, wouldn't they? But anyway, tying up loose ends for Christine. I've enjoyed being a granddaughter these past almost 2 years, and I stress the benefits. At least I knew her at all, or I've made a dear friendship that distance can't destroy. Yeah, those are all fine platitudes meant to ease partings, just like, oh, I'm sure I'll find time to visit. But sayings won't make me chicken stew when I ache, or apple pie when I'm shattered from parenting, from university, from lurching about all day, cane in hand, just aiming for home. Platitudes don't chat about the dailiness of life, the dear mundane. Actual grandmas I once had squandered their wisdom far from my door, one on booze, bad men, and bad greyhounds. One on a husband of sudden angers left her lame and fearful, unable to brave travel. And the great-grands are dead, long dead, and safe in their graves. But the grandmas we choose, and who choose us to love and worry about, homes of warm, fragrant, cake, soft, gentle, stew, softer advice, those are rare gifts. My grandma is moving before I've heard all her stories, learned more about a past I cannot visit even in my dreams. She kept so neat a home, the new tenant will just move right in. There is no dust. The floors are mopped, the fridge is spotless. To peek into the dwindling basement is more than I can bear. Plastic bin bags and boxes holding so much more than fried chicken and pot pies and genuine cornbread. The lure of senior housing and windows has packed my dear friend off, and I will miss her. I did try to visit, and I did, but it's not next door, and it was traffic and everything else, and so when you have a dear friend or someone like that, you go downstairs and you're like, I got the letter from those people, and you can pick up a conversation, but when it's once a year, you're like, oh, you don't even know where to start with the details, the mundane. But that was Christine, and absolutely adored her. She was just, and she was a proper grandma. When I had a spinal fusion and my own mother dropped off food I couldn't eat and took off, had a hospital bed in the living room, Christine had a job as someone who takes care of the elderly or the infirm. As a lot of folks without a lot of education do, they end up in these service jobs. And one day she goes, Miss Rose, have you had a shower yet? I was like, no, I think maybe we should scrape the nightgown off. She goes, I'm going to help you do that. How about that? And she was just so cool. Got the shower running, and as I disrobed, she kind of looked away and looked out the window and kept up a conversation, and then said, I'll be sitting right here. And then when she said, you ready to come out? And just kind of, as I put the towel on, looked away and kept up a conversation and looked out the window. This is how you do it, right? And I was like, you're my grandma. and after, because I'd had abdominal surgery, and she brought me a chicken stew, and the first day I could just about do the broth. The next day I could work on the noodles. Then I worked my way up to peas, and then I had it on the chicken. Oh, I do miss her. I don't know. That's been, almost 20 years now.
I think it's strange because thinking about my life now at my age of Methuselah, that we still want to have a parent or a grandparent to watch over us. But they're not there because they've died and passed.
What's that feeling of security and comfort that we're very lucky to have?
Yes, exactly.
My dad's currently sort of in the middle of the first year of it's the first blank without either of his parents anymore because his dad.
Oh, he's an orphan now.
Passed away a few years ago, and now his mum just recently, and she was amazing. She was completely batty, and just would say whatever she was thinking. I remember once we were walking down the street, and she said to me, oh, "Isn't that man ugly? Face like a dog." But she was always just so cheerful in her bluntness. It was wonderful.
Yeah, but that's the privilege of age.
Yes,
I've actually I'd quite like to sort of if I ever publish like a anthology of my poems, or collection rather. I'd quite like to have sort of like a few pages which are just the grandparent poems.
Yeah.
Because like I said, I've sort of got 6. Because of my stepmom's parents, who are kind of as much my grandparents as the biological ones.
Yeah.
And actually, if we've got time, I've got one about my stepmom's mum, who's one of those people that has had so much happen to her, and I can never really comprehend how much. And she's been ill for so long, and she lived through the war when she was a child. She was desperately poor, and I've just always been amazed by her dignity, and that's what this poem sort of I wrote it sort of in the last year to try and tell her, explain to her how I felt about her. And she's German, and we sort of speak in this sort of mixture of English and German whenever we meet, and it works. In this little space we meet, time and tongue close around our fingers, but where they touch, I feel the smallest crevice of a scar. I know from my guide, to whom you gave birth, from whom I gained life, I know from her that I am brushing up against a canyon, and I cannot imagine the every tiny seismic shift that ever pulled your world apart. I can only feel this humble cicatrix and hope that my own gaping gorges can ever heal as gracefully as yours.
Oh, that's lovely.
I love that. And well done while we're sitting there moving your mic back and forth. It's the perfect calculus of too close and too far. That was really lovely. Have you shared that with her?
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent.
Basically, I gave it to Carolyn, and she shared it with her, and she liked it, which is good.
I was moving the mic, so I missed. But do you have compound words that represent the German mixed with the English in it, or some kind of reference?
I don't. I considered trying to write it in as much German as I could, but its official title is Großmutti, which is basically grandmum. Mutti being sort of a more affectionate, shorter version of Mutter. I considered trying to write it in as much German as I could, but then I decided I'd rather sort of write it in my best English and let Carolyn be the intermediary, which she always has been for us, which is, our guide to whom you gave birth, from whom I gained life.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, translating German compound words is
that's
easy.
A lovely concept, though. I like that.
It's challenging, but they're wonderful, aren't they?
I think Hindi has mutti for mother as well. So there's that closeness of these words, particularly to do with family. Those family words have stayed constant through all the languages.
Well, that's how they know a language is connected. There's a handful of things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Words for hand and head, things that you need, and mother and father. And then when sound changed, like mater, pater became mother, father, when the T became a TH as different languages. And I think it was a guy, it's Child of Empire, some guy in the middle of India, killing time in the 1700s, and he realized the words were similar. Oh, counting, yeah. So dva was I forget the language, for two, and then we got d and two, and he went, hang on. So that became Indo-European, then it became Proto-Indo-European, which we call pi.
Well, it was kind of, as far as I understand, it was a sort of administrative thing, because they wanted to because they had to speak to sort of local officials using as much Hindi as they could, because they needed to have translations, and they were essentially sort of worried about what if the translators aren't doing a good enough job for whatever reason. So there was this push to try and kind of understand sort of Hindi and make it sort of more learnable, and then they realized there's a lot of these sort of parallels.
Yeah, I think someone
That's
realized
a bit of a tangent.
No, exactly, it is actually.
But it's about family, because this is
language, families,
language
and inheritance as well.
Yes,
that's true. That's true.
Yes, language is that area which reflects who we are and what we do at all times. Does anybody have anything else that they want to share?
I think I've got my Christine poem. I have one about my dad getting older, but I think I might just save it for another time on parenting, because it's just him. He was a granddad at that point, but he was horrified at aging.
Becca,
if we've got time, there's a point I was going to make earlier, but then I failed to interject. Was when Kit was doing the what about Gaia? I was remembering how the sort of the feeling of kind of realization that I had when I was first reading about the Greek myths and saying, oh, so like Zeus wasn't the first, you know, Zeus was actually just like the third in many generations of godlike beings. You can kind of draw a parallel between when you first realize that your grandparents were actually people that had, you know, lives.
Oh yes,
and you know, it's this idea of like when you realize that the past isn't past because it's still with you in the present. And it's a sort of, it's possibly a tenuous connection, but it's a similar kind of realization in my mind of like even the gods have grandparents. You know, have grandparents. Even the gods are sort of defined by their past and by their family's past.
Yeah, hugely. In Zeus's case, of course, being prophesied, so to speak, to depose his father, who was in turn prophesied to depose his father. And throughout that story, Gaia is there as a kind of constant figure watching all of this take place, and I found myself wondering when I was reading about her, what does she think when, you know, she intervenes with Kronos and then she intervenes with Zeus, and she keeps helping the young depose the old, and yet at the same time she goes so hugely underappreciated.
She's just waiting. She's just waiting.
Yeah, she's still waiting. She's going to bite us very seriously soon, I think.
She's the great.
She can afford to wait.
Yes. Thank you for listening to our ramblings on grandparents. You've been listening to The Poetry Show with me, Alan Gillott,
Rose,
Becca,
and Kit,
our special guest for today. You too can get involved. Send us some ideas for themes or topics you'd like to hear us discuss, or even take issue with the things we've said. Come back next time when we might be discussing immigration, or stupid mistakes, or sleep, or job sharing. Or how do you Google to write a poem for their ideas? We have been The Poetry Show, and we're the Podcast Poets. Tweet to us on Twitter at @podcastpoets, email us at podcast@podpoets.com, and find us on iTunes and give us reviews and ratings. This has been The Poetry Show, produced and edited by Adam Taglietti as a production of Eden Agency.